if anyone still uses it in 2025. We are on LinkedIn, which somehow people are still using it. Do you guys like LinkedIn? You guys all like it, right? I'm not a
Yeah.
huge fan, but I'm on there.
It's all
And
right.
then Instagram. So we got Insta, where I need to build my brand. But we got very special guests in the house. We got some Patient Ace promotion, myself and Ronick. Ronick is the founder, and then I'm a latecomer as a co-founder, co-owner. And David LaHaye is one of our success stories, a very successful site owner. He's actually a serial site owner. He's already sold successfully. Congrats on that, by the way.
Appreciate it.
Your Michigan site, and now you're in Rio Grande, Texas area.
Yep. The RGV.
RGV. And then we got Katie Welch, who's my employee number 2. Well, really employee 2.5. But she's still here. Yeah, there was Samantha and Desiree. Samantha was first.
Yeah.
Desiree was second, and then you. But Samantha's like half because she wasn't actually here. But yeah, Katie's still here. Go figure. Go figure. So Katie uses Patient Ace a lot. We've, at YCT, we're using a lot of the functions. Actually, to be honest, Dave, inspired by you, because when I met you at SOS, you were talking about how you've automated the scheduling, and I thought that was amazing. Because one of the bottlenecks when coordinators get busy is following up with leads, and then
it's always the first thing to not do.
It's definitely, and then you have to be in the right headspace for it. Like, if you're having a bad day and a potential patient's asking you all these questions, it's the same questions over and over and over. Like, you'd just rather not do that. You'd rather go answer queries, actually.
Yeah.
Than do that. I've done coordinating, Katie. I know. I used to do this all the time, but when I heard automating,
1970, what?
Yeah, in 76, when Jimmy Carter made us wait for gas. I remember fondly waiting for gas in line. But no, Dave, so you inspired me, man. And then Ronick's a genius that has built out. And then with Alexis, who's recently joined
I second that.
Our team, a customer success manager. She's amazing. So some of the changes are really cool. And we're here to just talk about your experiences with Patient Ace and then some of the new stuff that we have coming out.
Yeah, David, thanks, Dan, for the intro. David, if you can you just give a brief introduction, just, the quick 1 minute, so everyone knows who you are?
Sure. Well, I think Dan gave an excellent introduction, but basically, so I worked kind of in corporate executive leadership roles for a decade and a half or so, and then during COVID, I noticed a lot of my clients, which were major academic medical centers, all of a sudden they didn't want to touch it, and so I thought, well, who's going to do clinical research trials to find to test existing antivirals for their efficacy, combating COVID-19, and so I figured I would be one to do that. And so within that experience, I know you guys are going to talk to him later, but I started a business with Lee Eifler, and Lee and I, we were very quickly able to assess what is a successful business model, and everything kind of goes around the whole concept of patient recruitment. If you can't recruit patients, it doesn't matter how good your PI is, it doesn't matter how good your staff are, it doesn't matter how impressive your facilities are. Nothing matters, because that is really the core to everything, and that's really a revenue driver for sites as well. And so from that experience, what we learned was that in order to get those patients, we needed to have some type of real-time patient recruitment model. And what we employed at the time was was operationalizing a COVID testing tent in order to offer the people that test positive for for COVID, offer them a option to join a trial. And so that was extraordinarily successful. There wasn't a trial that we got that we weren't top enrollers on. And so, but obviously that was kind of a short win, because today there's not a whole lot of it, but it was a great formative experience. And so I then jumped into just trying to see where the puck was going within the industry, and I decided that we had this important period of time where mRNA vaccines were just like the world, and the market was just testing how broadly they could be applied. And also there was a huge push, which there still is, of diversity in patient enrollees. And so I went back to my hometown of Detroit, Michigan, and also Lee started this company with me as well, and we opened Great Lakes Research Institute. And patient recruitment there has never been an issue because we focus, like, there was at the time there was no Detroit area vaccine focused clinical research site, and so like I was number one, and then a bunch of other people joined me. So so that was and actually a couple of them, they had better business development functions, so they took the next company to come basically just got outpaced us for a while, but then ultimately we were able to grow the company, and then ultimately exited in December of this last year to Flourish Research. And so that was really a great experience as well. And then I know I'm going beyond my 1 minute, Ronak, but I mean I can kind of like dial this into back into PatientACE. But the key to any successful clinical research site is the ability to recruit patients, just end of story. And so when I first looked into PatientACE, because I've gone from COVID testing, operationalizing, like that works for a short period of time. Vaccines, you don't really need anything special in order to recruit vaccine patients. It's like, do you have a pulse? Do you not have leukemia? Are you not pregnant? Okay, join this trial. Like, those are the criteria. So it's fairly easy to do. But we do have a major challenge in just about every therapeutic area that you're kind of looking through a needle in a haystack. And so do you want to give human beings the job of discriminating between the needles and the hay, or do you want to give like a system, an automated system, so that what's going to get done? Because I shared, like, you don't have a site if you can't recruit patients. And so that is just such a core important competency of a clinical research site. And so I started my site here in the Rio Grande Valley a few years ago, and we weren't focused on vaccines. I mean, we've done vaccine trials, but the main focus has been on metabolic disorders. Like here in Hidalgo County, Texas, it is there's the phrase is diabesity. It's the most overweight, obese city in the world.
Wow, really?
Yeah, McAllen, Texas.
No kidding.
So yeah, I mean, there's one, like, there's some
the
small
world
island somewhere.
That's pretty that's pretty, like, that's hard to compete with when you're talking to sponsors, and we have a site in the number one most obese city in the world. That's I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's well, everything's bigger in Texas, I guess, but I mean, it's outside of the this is kind of a unique area. So there's some unique challenges. The patient demographics are considerably different than most cities in Texas and the rest of the country. So we were already starting with basically an enriched population that had a higher likelihood of developing fatty liver disease. And since my partner is a hepatologist, Dr. Emmanuel Grosby, he's trained at Johns Hopkins. He was formerly a professor at not MD Anderson, but Mayo Clinic, and until he went into private practice. And so, like, since that's kind of his main level of expertise, we decided, okay, we're going to first get our traction doing MASH and MASL studies. And so in order to recruit from that, if you don't have like an active, if you don't have an active patient database, which he lives out of town as well, doesn't have a patient population there. But we could focus on community development activities and utilize a device called a FibroScan in order to give free assessments, which is the call to action for patients, which is like the top of the funnel when you're talking about, like, and this is what PatientACE really enables. It's like you can take and start building your funnel. So that gives us the ability to get traffic into a clinical research site which which is something clinical research sites generally do not have. Like there's not natural traffic unless you've already enrolled a patient and has that backlog. So anyway, since I've taken 9 minutes, I guess I
no, it's good.
on back to one of you guys.
No, this is good. I mean, I found it interesting that you kind of pivoted from the COVID side to these other studies, and you were doing what I call top of funnel work with the COVID site, right? I'm assuming you were doing like COVID-free COVID screens or testing. Like how were you getting that that initial interest in traffic?
Yeah, well, so at that time, all you had to do is buy a banner that said "free
Oh,
COVID
really?
test." Show up, yeah.
Oh,
So
wow. Okay,
people would
so
show
literally
up.
just on the street, like,
Yeah,
and people would come in for that.
yeah, exactly. In the in the parking lot of
Wow,
our clinical research site. So we'd put the sign up, and then people would call. So the phone would ring, a coordinator would pick up,
that's
and then
amazing.
we'd schedule them to have them come in through the back way so they don't infect anybody, and then do the test. If they came up positive, we were like, you have an option to join a compensated study.
Mm,
And so that was so key, right? If you have traffic as a clinical research site, you can find patients that qualify for your studies. And unfortunately, like most, this is probably the biggest challenge to most new site owners, because what is like one of the main challenges that I see very few people doing very well is managing the two ends of the business development. In fact, there's basically three types of business development within a clinical research site. There's patient recruitment, which is like a business to consumer type of transaction, and then there's there's a study acquisition, which is like a business to large business, and then there's community development with other businesses, like other physicians' offices and whatnot. And that's like a business to small business. So there's very few people that can do all three of those very well
yes.
and keep your sanity and not be a complete masochist all at once. Um, but that's kind of the beauty of, not my opinion, of PatientACE, is like it takes one of those. If you can backwards engineer something that you think is going to work, have a call to action, have some type of advertisement going on that drives patients to bring traffic to you, you can at least take care of one of those and focus on the other two. And as a business owner, nobody's going to say like, hey, what am I going to do with all my copious time, right?
That's
you
true.
you want to take care of things like that and not be looking over your employees' shoulders to make sure that they're doing their jobs.
Yeah, I think one of the unique things about the way you approached it, David, was that like you started with these COVID studies, which was like very easy to get the patients and the interest, and you were able to pivot into these other studies. Um, I think the average person or most people would be like, well, people are not coming in. This is not like COVID. It's hard. And I think we saw that in the industry with like so many sites coming on during the COVID time. And then, they did very well, got, lots of studies, lots of patients. And then after COVID, it, just kind of fell off. And, not every site was able to survive that. But it kind of speaks to your way of thinking, I guess, that you were just looking, you knew what the question was, you knew the right question to ask, which was, how do I sort of replicate what we were doing with COVID studies with these other studies in other ways? And that's probably what led you to kind of seek out a solution.
Yeah, that's very kind of you to to say that. I appreciate that. I recall when I was first learning about the industry, I was talking with somebody who was doing a very low enrollment study, and he was the business owner, and he had told me, he was explaining to me, how the industry works, and I'm just kind of looking at it like I'm a McKinsey consultant. Like, how do I unpack the organization to the fundamentals, and then focus on which parts are essential for a healthy organization and to build and grow that. And then he was kind of describing like they're doing these studies that require, or that are extraordinarily difficult to recruit the patients, They have just a laundry list of inclusion exclusion criteria, and so you've got um, basically their expectation, or the sponsor's expectation, was that you enrolled 2 patients per study. And then I would hear things like, hey, we almost just got this down, and then all of a sudden we hit our limit of 2 patients per study. And I was like, well, if you've just finally figured out how to find those patients, like and you had all these other patients kind of in the queue that you wanted to screen, like, would the sponsor be okay with you enrolling 3? And he's like, oh yeah, they're always interested, but we're so happy to be done that we want to move on and find another
Really?
study. And my thought was like, well, if you're doing well at that, like if you enrolled a third patient, isn't that increasing your revenue by 50%? And I'm like, that's to me, like, as like if I put my consultant hat on, and I'm like, okay, so all we have to do is like do something that we started out when we're fresh. We don't really, we've got energy, but we've got to get on this journey of learning how to find and recruit these patients. And all of a sudden we get to the point where we know how to do it, and then we quit and then go repeat that. It's like, if you can push a little harder and then get 50% more revenue just by enrolling one more patient, that's like, to me, that was the first thing that came to mind in when I put my consulting hat on. And so that's kind of the mindset that I brought to to West Valley, where Lee and I like put together the COVID tent or COVID recruitment process. And then that's what we took in the mRNA world with Great Lakes Research Institute. And, and then, now we kind of have a similar situation where GLP-1 receptor agonists are being used for everything under the sun. And so you have similar, patients that are, that they might have, they'll often are obese or diabetic, and they'll have other things that may manifest, their disease may manifest differently. They may have chronic kidney disease. They may have some type of heart disease. They may have MASH or fatty liver disease. But, but if you can get multiple studies around that, then you can essentially have a funnel to recruit all of those patients, and then you're essentially sorting the needles out of a stack of needles rather than looking for the needles in a haystack. And that completely revolutionizes how a clinical research site functions. The closer you can get to that, where you're bringing in people that are in general in a level of health where the studies that you offer can will either help them with what you currently have, or maybe a study you have later on will ultimately help them. But if you can get to that point where you're sorting patients that have different disease manifestations into the studies that they qualify for, rather than screen failing and disappointing people because you're not really you're barking up the wrong tree, so to say, when it comes to recruiting patients.
Yeah, going back to your earlier point with it kind of made me think of an analogy with they enrolled 2 and they could have gotten a third one. It's kind of like you're digging a well, and then you hit water and you stop digging and you go somewhere else, and you start the process all over.
Yeah.
And then there's all these dug up holes, and it's funny you brought that up, because that's one thing that that we've been discussing recently, because typically when sites are looking for a recruitment solution, they're laser focused on, okay, I have, let's say a site has 5 studies, and they're doing well on 3 of them, but 2 of them they're not focused on. They're not doing well on recruitment. Typically, what happens is, okay, they're focused on, okay, I need patients for these 2 studies. And sometimes it's just an issue of getting more traffic, getting more leads, and going through the filtration process. And sometimes it's the study itself is just not very conducive to recruitment, like you said. One of those unicorn studies that has so many IE criteria that it's hard. It's very difficult. And sites, and I think this is kind of human nature. People kind of focus on their quote unquote weaknesses, like, oh, we're doing well, but we're not doing well in these, so let's put money towards this and see if we can kind of recruit. But one thing I want to start focusing on is more of a kind of bird's eye view process where we're asking our clients, hey, what other studies do you have that you don't necessarily need, quote unquote, need more patients, but if you've already recruited 8 out of 10 or even 10 out of 10 for another study, Patient ACE can probably supercharge that, and we, potentially we could double it. Not saying that the sponsor would go for
Yeah.
that, but if they accept 2 or 3 more, and you have 2 or 3 studies like that, the end result is the same, right? You're getting revenue. Whether you get the patient from study A or study B, it helps the bottom line, it helps the top line, it helps get more patients, and it's sort of a win-win. But I think, I'm curious as to whether sites are kind of thinking in that manner, or would be open to thinking in that manner, or is it just like, do they get capped off, and sponsors just don't allow you to do more? I think that would be an interesting interesting thing to explore.
Yeah, I think to unpack a couple of those things that you brought up, it's fairly rare that studies have caps to it. And I'd say the big
Mm,
exception to that right now is obesity trials, where it's
sure.
very easy to find the patients because just about everybody wants a free medication that costs $1,500 a month. But
I've come across a couple of obesity studies very recently that it's impossible to enroll, but
oh,
we'll talk.
really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So, but with, for instance, with those studies, I doubt that there would be a cap if it's
Mm,
difficult to enroll, which is most of the challenge that we face, is that studies that we get awarded,
mm,
we're not going to be tripping over qualified patients that are eager to join those trials. So what I've noticed with a lot of other sites, and this is just different about how I think. I was been in business development my whole life, so if I wasn't performing, I would get fired basically every quarter. And so I
mm,
with clinical research sites, oftentimes the person running the show doesn't necessarily have direct, like they're not incentivized through performance, financial performance,
mm,
right? And so what happens is that the studies that you're performing poorly on, you are very frequently cajoled by the
makes
staff at
sense.
the sponsor to have booster visits and discuss your enrollment and your screening activity, and patients, why they screen failed, and all those things. And so the less financially viable studies you have ultimately become the more time intensive studies.
Mm,
And especially when you have staff doing it that don't have that don't kind of have that, like that motivation of the financial performance and the financial health of the organization. So uh, I've always taken the approach of, like, you want to take what you're good at and keep, you want to be really, really good at something. Like General Electric forever has had, they've only gone into industries that they could be like
mm.
either
1 or
number
2.
one or number
Yeah.
two in those industries, which is why they don't make toasters anymore, because because there's a lot of Asian countries that make toasters better and cheaper than General Electric ever could. And so, like, that's kind of what my thought is like, I'll definitely take on studies that we don't perform well on, but we're
Mm,
not going to waste our time doing that. It's like we're kind of testing the waters, seeing what we're good at, seeing where our capabilities really can shine, and we want to invest in those things, in those therapeutic areas where we can really shine and take off in. And if you're good at that, those sponsors will take note, and then they'll give you more opportunities within that space. And I think actually Yuma Clinical Trials has as an experience like that. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that Dan, you shared with me once that one of your first studies was what was it, like an arthritis of the knee study,
Yeah,
and then
yeah, yeah.
you did a great job with recruitment, and then they basically found other arthritis of the knee
Yeah, same
studies.
CRO. Yeah,
Yeah,
Katie was on that. Actually, that
mm,
was our first study with Katie, I believe,
yeah.
way before Patient ACE existed.
yeah.
But
Yeah. So I mean, if you figure out how to recruit patients like well that have arthritis of the knee, like why would you say, okay, well, I'm going to try,
Yeah.
COPD next? I don't want to.
it
I don't want
happens
to do what
though.
I'm good at, which
We
is,
had
I think.
someone We had someone today on PatientACE for a study, and they didn't qualify for that indication, but they're getting pre-screened for another one of our studies.
Yeah.
So if you have more studies, like, you have more of those opportunities.
Yeah.
It's kind of like somebody, you know, to simplify it in the most simple way, like, you know, you have a lemonade stand, and you know, you sell lemonade, but the person doesn't want lemonade. They want orange juice or cranberry juice.
Yeah.
You know, the more you know, clinical research is very different. It's not.
Yeah.
We're not selling lemonade. It's you know, it's hard to make a comparison, but you know, essentially, the
Yeah,
more
it's like,
alternate products you have, you know, the more
yeah.
offerings you have.
Yeah, just to, I guess, riff with your analogy,
Yeah.
like if you have a lemon orchard, what would be a smarter ancillary thing to do? Start a lemonade stand or start an orange juice stand? You
That's
know,
a good
it's
one. Yeah.
obviously you have the resources and you have the expertise. It's going to be a lower activation energy to, you know, go into the lemonade stand rather than planting an orange orchard in order to make orange juice, right? So, and that I think is I mean, if you don't share this with people already, one of the critical items within a site that PatientACE helps out with is that it kind of takes those learning experiences and has a consistent and regular campaign going, like, or at least it has the power to do so, right? Because the traditional way of recruiting for studies, and there's a gazillion different companies that will help you do this, is that, you know, you'll get a, you know, an IRB approved ad, or maybe you'll have something special design that you then submit to the IRB, and it might be a little bit better design of an ad. So it's, you know, maybe you're starting with something that's like 10-15% better. You get activated on a study, and then let's say you got 6 months in order to find patients. So you start advertising, and then they just pop out a bunch of leads, and then whenever you get a chance to call them, you'll call them, and hopefully they won't be cold, and hopefully they'll pick up. Right. But I think the beauty of the power of PatientACE is that it gives you something that once that 6 months is over, you can then very quickly continue to, you know, you could quickly continue to let it flourish and maybe pivot it towards dialing in towards a different therapeutic area. That way you can take that experience you've gotten, you know, you're digging the well, right? And you're almost there to water, and you just decide to stop and dig it somewhere else. It's like, no, you continue on, and ultimately you'll hit water and put in the well.
Yeah, I think that's I mean, that's also a good approach, in that I think most sites kind of look at it in an isolated. Okay, we have this study, and then we have this study, and then we have that study. But if you're you know, if you're kind of looking at it as a system rather than just a you know, study by study, that's kind of what we're aiming for with PatientACE. That, you know, creating a system of and a funnel for recruitment for, you know, multiple different studies, multiple different indications, rather than just being seen as a vendor for X study or Y study. And that's probably one thing that kind of differentiates us from maybe other you know, other approaches and other vendors. I'm curious as to how, number one, how you heard about us, and number two, you know, did you explore any other alternates before, and what was your experience with that?
That's
The
I don't
other
know.
ones are horrible. No?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, we have. Gosh, I mean, how much
And
time
you
do we
don't
have?
name names. You know,
I,
just I'm curious. You know, what
yep.
differences are that you have seen?
Yeah. So I'll dig up some of my experiences within the vaccine world, and,
Okay.
you know, since it's so easy, we didn't really spend money on any type of central
Sure.
services, because the sponsors often would have some type of like sponsored vendor that they would utilize, and so we would just sign up for that, and then we'd get emailed, you know, leads, and then we'd just call up, and whenever we connected with somebody, oftentimes they were interested, because in that space you have a lot of professional patients,
Sure.
and so they like are actively looking for studies. So there was
Was that in real time, by the way? Like, did you get like an email a day with all of the names, or was it like just throughout the day?
So that is the biggest one of the biggest challenges with that. So there's two that I'll bring up, but one of them is like each vendor is slightly different. Sometimes you'd get them in real time, but there's often a significant delay.
Okay.
The other challenge is that, when are people on Facebook? Are they, when they're in the middle of the day, if you're a roofer and you're on top of a roof, are they like playing around with Facebook? No, they wait till they get home, and that's when they are going to be clicking and filling out forms. So, no matter what, the leads are going to be relatively stale by the time anybody gets them, or the majority of those leads are going to be stale, and because those patients won't have any opportunity to engage them. Other times, these vendors would just give you a batch all of a sudden, like you wouldn't get anything for a week, and then you'd get like 50 emails dumped into to your inbox of people to call, and then it's like, well, wait, did nobody clicked on this thing and then all of a sudden 50 people did, or are these like 50 stale leads that just came in? And I don't know what the
So you didn't have any visibility into that, like how like the timestamp or anything like that?
No, well, I don't think so. I'd have to. That scratching sound you hear is me scraping the back of my mind for any specifics on these. I just remember kind of like just dealing with and living with the frustration. But if you're, it's, but nonetheless, those are, there's a lot of room for recovery if you have a study that's extraordinarily easy to recruit for, right? Like putting, it's if you've got the easiest study in the world to recruit for, having to work twice as hard to recruit a patient is not that bad. It's when you have a very difficult study to recruit for, and then because of your tools, it makes it twice as hard. Then all of a sudden, it's your site is no longer financially viable because of the additional costs associated with that. But then the third item that was irritating about other and this is probably with the the sponsor vendor, or the sponsor vendors that we worked with, is that since we didn't own it, we didn't actually have control over it. So sometimes they would shut off, right? And this was a fairly common thing, which is like we wouldn't receive any leads, and so it'd be like this black hole. We wouldn't have any communication as far as what's going on. And then instead of like a week later we get a dump of 50, we would just not get another one for like weeks, and then we'd have to call into the sponsor, and the sponsor would say, oh yeah, we shut it off because nobody was using it. I'm like, well, that's our only way to get patients, so you should have let us know. And so it's not very financially prudent to rely on a system like that, where oftentimes in this space, like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And so clinical research sites are constantly just left in the dark when it comes to what the sponsor is doing, and not if for nefarious purposes, just because
it's just like nature of the beast.
Yeah, when you've got a million plates you're spinning, it's like making sure that everybody knows what's going on is the last thing, especially when it's a site like you're the people coming to you to try to get more business, right? Like they're so easy to disappoint. They'll still come back to more, or for more. But then to answer your second question, I've known you guys for quite a while, and actually Lee brought up PatientACE because of he had a couple of studies. He used PatientACE, and he didn't really fully utilize the power of the tool, but he was extraordinarily impressed with your ability to get the ads in front of the right people, so that you start with an extraordinarily enriched patient population, which he and I both know how to use, or have lots of experience using different recruitment vendors.
Sure.
And so what he noticed is like, this is definitely worth my time. Whenever I get a lead from PatientACE, I know that it's a very high likelihood that this patient will qualify. They'll have a certain degree of interest in the study. And so, he had that certainty that, as soon as that patient came in, he knew that person was on the website filling out the information, and so it was fresh in their mind. So he made a point to contact and engage that person in a very short period of time, and he had a lot of success doing so. So he told me, he's like, you got to use that. And so then I was looking into it for our the liver trials that we've got, and then you sent me the app, and it's massive. There's lots of things going on, but then I started noticing the utility within that tool and the ability to, I think well, I don't know, like where do I begin? Uh, the ability to essentially do automation via like SMS texting and there's so many new tools with AI that I think could probably be incorporated into it. So so I was just looking at the ability to connect it to various things, and it just immediately popped up that like hey, we could use this to basically have patients interact with the system and then schedule themselves. As long as you have a call to action, as long as you have something that you're offering them, that they want, that's free. And so then we set it up for this the liver scan program, which is kind of a feeder, a pre-screening where we assess the health of the patient's liver and determine whether or not they qualify for a study. And so we set up this this process that a patient sees this opportunity, this ad to join a liver trial or get a free liver scan, and they click on that, they put in their information, and they get communicated over their cell phone, at whenever, at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, when they're watching late night news or whatever they're doing. And so they get that immediate engagement through the system, and then they self-schedule. And then at that point, you're able to look at the metrics in order to kind of dial in your campaigns. But I just felt that was absolutely brilliant. We need something to make traffic happen within our site, and so that's one of these tools that the more time you have in the saddle, the more work you do learning this tool, the better you're going to be at it. The better you're going to be able to dial in those metrics and ensure that the turnover is reduced, the number of patients that the ratio of the patients that show up to being no shows when they self-schedule is higher, and so you don't have like these one study ends and then you have to go back and relearn and start digging the well again. You have that ability to continue, and that thing's going to survive the enrollment phase of the studies that you have. And so that's just been such that's essentially been just the revenue driver of the business.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole concept of just having somebody show up at your site with essentially no prior human interaction is, even to me, it's still a little mind blowing. That's like, what, like people just showing up and it's not going to be 100%. There's going to be drop off. There's going to be people that no show. But even if you go like you guys were getting what, like half or more?
We had about 40% drop off.
Okay, so 60% of the people who are like on Facebook at 11 p.m. at night, watching infomercials and scrolling through. I'm making that up. I don't know.
Yeah.
But they're scrolling through and they see an ad. They're picking a time. So I mean, there's so many steps involved in that process from a mental standpoint. If you're relaxing, like, are you really thinking about, well, okay, on Wednesday I gotta pick up the kids, on Thursday it's pizza night, and like are they like, so they're scheduling, they're looking at their calendar, they're picking a time, they're scheduling. Obviously the system is sending them confirmations and reminders like, hey, you have this, don't forget, and people show up, and that's like, I think that's a big marvel. I think you're one of the few sites that's actually that has that set up. But I think more should take advantage of that, because it's just like, it doesn't, percentages don't matter. At the end of the day, it's who shows and like how many show up. And as long as that, it's producing enough of an ROI, you could have a 90% drop off. It doesn't matter.
And you can ramp that up if you want. If you have a 40% no-show rate and you want to double the number of people and it's not exactly
true.
it, right? There's some
Sure.
plateauing at some level, but generally when it comes to advertising spend, but you can always ramp up advertising spend. You don't happen to know where into that curve it is. Like, I don't know any clinical research site that takes
And
such specific nuances within metrics. Maybe Nelson Rudrick in Massachusetts, but other than him, I couldn't imagine there's too much of that going on in this space. But
yeah,
just juxtapose for a minute let's say, how about what 99% of sites are doing versus
right.
this model. So what 99% of sites, let's walk from the patient experience and include wherever the site interjects. So patient experience, the patient, it's 9:30 at night, patients watching the infomercials and ordering a slap chop or whatever. And then they're looking through Facebook. They say, oh, okay, I would like to do this pre-screening, and so they schedule the pre-screening, and then sorry, I just bungled that because so this is the way 99% of sites are doing. So it's 9:30 at night, they see an ad, they click on it, they give their information to the site. Then best case scenario, the next morning somebody will call that person. Will they pick up? Probably not.
Right.
But maybe they'll try. If they do a really great job, let's say they do pick up, and then they schedule that patient for some time, and then maybe send a follow-up email that says, okay, you are confirmed, here's your information. They hear nothing from the site. They're probably 50-50 whether or not they show up, probably more than that. Now this model, like you'll start at same person, 9:30 at night, is immediately engaged by the system, like goes through, compares their calendar on their cell phone, schedules themselves, gets a confirmation text message, and then has a certain degree of reminders and back and forth so that it's fresh in their mind. And then what you can do as a site, because I think the biggest criticism that I have that I think is really valid in taking this approach, is that there is a lack of human interaction. That's true at the core. But I would rather, instead of starting with raw data, raw leads, I would rather, once somebody's already expressed enough interest to schedule, that's when I want my staff to step in and make the call. And so that patient then gets a friendly, warm phone call from the coordinator who says, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I'm going to be helping you, or I'm going to be facilitating your visit. We look forward to seeing you on Thursday at 10 o'clock. Do you need any more information? This is the number you can call, whatever, just a friendly, warm call. And then that one thing that we had done actually did boost, because we're kind of around a little bit more than half of patients would ultimately be no-shows, and we bumped it up to over 40 under 40%, based on just adding that additional phone call.
So this was after they scheduled, and what was the timeline from meaning? So you reached out to follow up in. Was it like at the first? I guess, when did you do that?
So when did we make the?
When you started following up manually, how soon after they scheduled the appointment were you reaching out to them? Was it like first available at first, so like the next day, or was it dependent on when their appointment was to confirm it?
So I don't know for sure. Like, that was something we left it up to the staff to do. But basically, the staff had owned, like when we had a patient schedule, the employees were required to own those visits.
Gotcha.
And so we had expressed to every employee, like, okay, you could check and see when you have patients, and then contact those patients. So usually I would imagine it had went something like, they looked at who was on the calendar for the following day, and then that day they would contact all the patients that they had to see for pre-screenings and do the introduction. And I mean, it's possible that there were somebody that scheduled something after they made the phone calls and never got that. But this is just kind of an additional courtesy. I'm not focused on, like, having a process is better than being not having a process is better. I don't care. Like, if you have a process, if you hit 90% of that process, you still have a process. It's better than having no process and hitting that no process 100% of the time.
Yeah, and I think the iteration and the experimentation behind the efforts is also commendable because you initially you guys were at 60% fall off, and adding the human element, it definitely helps. So there's no sort of one size fits all. The more you follow up, the more often you follow up, the quicker you follow up, the better results you're going to have. And so the fact that you guys didn't sit back and say, okay, well, we're getting people, so that's fine. But
Yep.
looking for ways, first of all, looking at the metrics. Number one, knowing what the metrics are, that's the first step, right?
Yep.
And we try to provide that obviously on a dashboard so you can kind of track it. But then, sort of coming up with experiments to say, okay, well, let's call them and let's see what happens to improve that rate. And that's a significant improvement. 30% improvement in show rate. That's huge.
Hmm.
Were you guys? Do you know the order of operations for? Was staff texting them first and then calling them, or calling and then texting? Were they using Patient Ace to do the texting and calling?
Yeah. So I've always felt that simply, having the Patient ACE program is
Mhm.
good enough, and
Mm.
I just wanted to inject that. So I wasn't like I'm not just tinkering on everything.
Yeah.
And most of the people, criticizing me for the process of not having like a warm human being involved, it was, came from staff. So it was,
Mm.
in some sense, it's like, okay, well, here's the deal. You can now call everybody.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
we're
that's
all
a good
happy.
step
So
that they actually want to do that. That's
yeah.
that's commendable.
Yeah, so that's just kind of what we shared, but it makes a very different world. Whereas before, it's like we'd get a bunch of leads, and then I was worried whether or not like they were actually calling the leads
Mm.
in a timely manner. Were they connecting with anybody, or like was it just the last thing that they were going to do, or the first thing that they were not going to do?
Sure.
And so if there was like, hey, this is the normal thing, and I wonder whether or not they're going to do it, I'd rather have that process there, and then wonder or not whether they're going to have that second, like that separate warm follow-up call,
Mm.
because that wasn't a mission critical piece of
Makes
the
sense.
patient recruitment funnel. But what is a mission critical piece, if you don't have that Patient ACE process, it is mission critical to make sure that your staff actually follow through and call it. So it's not like it's lacking that human component,
Mm.
but it's just not dependent upon that human component.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. I mean, you can't follow up if you don't have leads.
Yes,
Uh,
exactly. And if you don't follow up with those leads,
yeah.
then you won't get the patients in. It doesn't matter how many leads you have, how good they are, if you don't have anyone, if you can't trust that people are going to follow up, which, if the monitor's telling you, hey, we got some old queries here, get this done, like
Yeah.
they're gonna, and that I think is one big headache that I feel is that oftentimes when you own a clinical research site, everybody else is telling your staff what to do,
Mm.
and you might say, here's my priorities, but then you might have 10 other monitors that are also
Yeah.
giving them other priorities, and so what you say goes by the wayside because they hear them more
Mm.
often, right? And so
Yeah. It's squeaky wheel, right?
yeah, exactly. So it's what I feel is just having that tool that is not dependent upon human intervention in order to
Mm.
succeed is absolutely mission critical. And sure, you can make it a little better with some human, with some elbow grease, but that's but if they do it, great. If not, I'm not going to sweat over it.
Mm. Um, I know we're hitting an hour. Time flew by. I didn't even realize.
Yeah.
So, could you do you track your ROI on your spend with Patient Ace? And I'm curious to know, what is like a rough estimate of ROI, or like a broad, if you were to put a number to it, um, just for just to follow.
Hmm. Let's see. I haven't gone to that level. I think there's some, I
Or if there's any, could you attribute like a rough revenue number to Patient Ace,
mm,
if you had to?
yeah. So hmm, I let's see. I I think that maybe one way to put it, because we have these screen fail heavy, heavy
Sure.
trials, and so whether they screen or not, generally those first visits are going to be, like those first visits
Mm,
are usually going to have some level of compensation,
sure.
and so um, we've had anywhere from 4 to 6 per day on average that we allow to schedule. And then out of
Mm,
that 4 to 6, we have 1 to 2 that qualify and ultimately screen for a trial. So for every business day, you're looking at whatever your screening visit happens to be, which, if you have, which like I've had screening, I'd say kind of on average, you're talking $2,000 to $4,000.
mm,
So it's like the ROI is exceptionally solid.
mm.
um, for a tool like PatientACE. It literally, if you have it running for a week, it 5x's what the monthly cost is. And if you have it, obviously if it's going for the full month, you're probably getting 20x that. And it's also, on the other piece is that if you set it up to automate, then it's like having another employee that you don't have to pay for and you know is going to do their job, which is the
Yeah.
best thing. I wish I could find some of those employees, but
I like that approach of, kind of, I think it's very easy to look at a tool or software or vendor and kind of compare it to like, oh well, this costs this much and that costs that much.
yep.
But when you have something that can essentially replace a full-time employee,
Hmm.
that's how I prefer to think of any sort of investment and ROI, because, well, even if you find somebody and you pay them 10-15 bucks an hour, there's still the cost associated with that is far beyond what any software or tool or most vendors are charging, and I think that's the case for PatientAce.
Yeah.
And so we do get sites that say, well, that's just very expensive, and we don't it's we don't have the budget for it, and that's understandable. But if
They
when
don't
you
have
kind
the
of
budget not for it. I
yeah,
mean, to be
yeah,
honest, it's essentially, it's like, I would say, maybe if you one day hired me as a sales rep for PatientAce, I would say,
hey,
like,
you're hired.
your monthly fee. Oh, thank you. But like, your monthly fee is, and this is, and I think you were the one that gave me this analogy. Like,
Yeah.
it's like a machine where you put a quarter in and a dollar comes out.
Mm,
Like, who wouldn't be putting quarters in that machine all day long?
sure,
And it's
sure.
just it's kind of confounds me sometimes how, like, there's lots of business opportunities that are overlooked because they're too expensive. But
Mm,
if it's an investment, like the purpose of investment is making money, like, I mean,
sure.
the S&P 500 is like 6,600 today. I think it's like, almost. And that sounds pretty expensive. It's never been
Yeah,
that expensive before, but in 8 years it'll be double that.
yeah.
So
Hopefully.
okay, this isn't investment advice, so nobody sue me. I don't want to get any nasty letters, but it's like, you've got to understand. Like, let's take the old Oscar Wilde quote. This might be a good way to wrap things up: is people know the price of everything and the value of nothing.
Mm,
And I think that that's a very important thing that is a difficult workaround, like, especially in this industry where everybody's focused on patient care and they don't put the care into feeding their business and making it
mm,
thrive, to really understand, like, the difference between price and value. And so, there's certain things that are too like, they might look expensive, but it's too, like it, it's too, um, like, the most expensive thing is not doing it.
mm,
Just like the most expensive thing for an investor to do is to not invest.
mm,
And the most expensive thing for a site, to do is to not own a patient recruitment mechanism.
mm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way to put it. I also want to caveat with what you just said. That, I wish we were 100%. We had 100% percent success rate. We don't. And I'm curious as to your perspective in terms of who would this not be a good fit for? What kind of site should not use a service like ours?
I mean, there's a few sites that I'm aware of that that kind of fix this problem in their own separate special way. Like those probably would be like hard to reach target clients. But I think that if you are if you're a site owner and you don't want to take the time to think through something before implementing it, then it doesn't matter how great it is. It's you're not there's still work to implement it. So if you feel like, okay, well, I'm just going to buy this thing and it's just going to work, like you got to put some work into like understanding what your challenge is. Because PatientACE, it's not a magic wand, but
Right.
it's a suite of tools that enables you to take some piece of the physical reality and then automate it within the cloud, and and attract patients to your site. But it takes some work to understand your business in order to make that funnel operate and function. And so, like, it's not a magic wand. But you could make it the goose that lays the golden eggs. I think I've
Well
got
put.
like some kind of idiom limit that I'm bumping up on. So
Yeah, well put. We've gone over time, so I'll let you go. But David, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. You are one of the more successful clients that we have, and we hope to get a lot more and help a lot more sites. And anyone else that do we have live viewers, Dan? Do we want to open up for questions or?
Nobody put any questions, but
Okay. All right. Great. Well, thank you so much. Dan, anything else to wrap up?
get PatientACE, PatientACE.com. It's a no-brainer.
Awesome.
Yep, I second that.
Like, subscribe, comment, share, and go to PatientACE.com right now as we end the live stream. PatientACE.com, PatientACE.com, PatientACE.